Welcome to the G20 Interfaith Podcast, a platform where we explore the intersection of faith, global challenges, and policy.
Hello, and welcome everyone to the first in a series of 8 webinars focusing on artificial intelligence. Today's webinar is co-sponsored by the G20 Interfaith Forum and the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. My name is Audrey Kitagawa, and I will be the moderator today. The speakers, as well as my biographical information, will be placed in the chat box for your perusal, so I will not be providing to you our background information. This will give us more time to have substantive inputs and conversation with our speakers. Our topic today will address the intersection of faith traditions with the incredibly fast-paced and consequential AI technologies that are touching all of our lives and raising many questions about its risks and consequences as well as its benefits. It is critical that faith organizations prioritize engagement with developers of new technology and with policymakers, because their voices can provide a moral ethical framework imbued with the wisdom of their traditions and its community perspectives to help steer technological innovation toward human flourishing and well-being. Last month, Pope Leo issued a substantial encyclical warning of the threats that AI poses to human dignity and agency. The Pope expressed the opinion that technology is not inherently evil, nor antagonistic to humanity, but he warns that it takes on the characteristics of those who develop, regulate, and use it. He appealed for a shared focus on the common good and the importance of remaining human. The Pope's encyclical is entitled Magnifica Humanitas, or Magnificent Humanity, on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. In this encyclical, the Pope stressed the civilization of love in a digital age, and that it is a demanding but necessary project to build the common good. He also indicated that we all have responsibility to build this civilization of love from the sum of small and steadfast acts of fidelity that serve as the bulwark against dehumanization. Interestingly, the Anthropic co-founder Chris Olah was invited to speak at the presentation of the encyclical in Vatican City, doing so as part of Anthropic's initiative to widen the conversation on the important questions raised by AI. Anthropic later released a warning to the public that the most powerful AI systems are showing signs of slipping beyond human control, and requesting a global pause on the most powerful AI systems. Co-founder Jack Clark put it very bluntly to the BBC when he said the industry has a gas pedal and no brake pedal, and that the car is already on the highway doing 90 miles per hour. With robust moral and ethical foundations imbued with the wisdom of faith traditions, AI technologies driven by the pursuit of power and profit can result in having more without being more, and individuals become data points rather than unique beings. Their worth based on their productivity, performance, or creativity, and really without regard for the beautiful individual characteristics of being human and having conscience and consciousness. We are pleased to welcome 3 speakers who have spent much time in recent years focusing on AI and faith to help us understand this new landscape. We will begin today's conversation with Will Jones, an associate of the Futures Program at the Future of Life Institute. Will, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. It's evening for me, so good evening, but good morning for many of you, I'm sure. I'll just get my slides up here. Okay, so I'm starting this with the provocative title of "Are you pro-human?" Might seem like an obvious question, most people would probably answer yes. But it seems as though some people in their actions and in their lobbying and in their sort of campaigning are increasingly not pro-human, or rather pro-human in a more complicated sense. So I'm going to be talking about the race to replace, which we're seeing in the AI industry, and a possible better path for humanity, and the role for faith groups to play. So just first of all, I work for the Future of Life Institute, FLI. It's a nonprofit set up in 2014, which makes us quite old when it comes to AI safety organizations. And we do a lot of sort of policy advocacy in the US, the EU, and at multilateral levels. We do a lot of raising awareness of AI capabilities and the sort of the industry more broadly. I work on something called the Futures Program, which is working with a broader range of groups. I focus explicitly with religious groups, as Audrey mentioned, helping them to try and play a bigger part within this discourse and to help realize a better world with AI. So I just wanted briefly to go through a few points of where we're at with AI at the moment. AI corporations continue to race towards systems that replace humans. That is, not just systems that can empower humans to do particular tasks, but actually to do those tasks for those humans instead of them. We currently have still no meaningful regulation ensuring these systems are safe upon the point of release. The regulatory gap means that systems are already causing harms. We've seen that most acutely with children being harmed by AI chatbots in the last few years, but also in military domains and increasingly with layoffs due to AI replacing jobs. A coalition is growing in response to demand better, to demand regulation, and to demand that the industry goes in a more pro-human direction. Faith leaders and groups are starting to make their voices heard on this subject. And obviously this evening is in many ways testament to that. Governments, as of very recently, just in the last couple of months, have shown a new willingness to intervene in AI developments. And as we speak, there's this showdown going on between the US government and Anthropic, which in effect is a pausing of the release of Anthropic's latest system, Claude Fable 5. There's lots of details there that are very controversial, but the point I'm just making here is that the government has seen the risks of AI as such that they will need to intervene in quite dramatic and unforeseen ways. And recently, the Chinese government also introduced strict laws on anthropomorphic AI, mimicking human capabilities and characteristics. So there are domestic and global policy opportunities and also new battles to fight. At FLI, we frame this thinking about two paths. We have what we're currently on with the biggest AI companies racing to replace humans. And this is a site you can find online called abetterpath4.ai, based on the writing of FLI CEO Anthony Aguirre. And within that race to replace, we can see a race to capitalize on attention, which we've already had for over 20 years with social media, systems optimized to capture our attention and hold it for as long as possible. And then, that's attention. And then you have now attachment increasingly with AI companions, mentors and therapists replacing human relationships with engineered substitutes, AI systems that know everything about you and can give you, supposedly more fulfilling and more tempting relationships, but actually lead to alienation from the real world. More speculative, but seemingly on the horizon, we have AI replacing human workers, which is the explicit goal of the Frontier AI Labs, and the CEOs make no, bones about talking about that quite often. And the basis of AI companies' trillion-dollar valuations is, of course, that they can, capture entire industries by laying off, that number of workers. Ultimately, the game is, of course, about power. Profit as a means of power. The stated aim of the leading AI companies is actually superintelligence or AGI, with the proviso that AI systems beyond a certain point are more intelligent and more capable than any human. And of course, the game there is to do that before anyone else. All of these companies say the same thing: this is terribly dangerous. No one else should be doing this. I'm going to have to do it because only I can do it correctly. And just some research from the other week in terms of how the uses of AI are already changing with regards to these current harms. You'll see that therapy and companionship is still reported as the most common usage of generative AI, as defined by the Harvard Business Review. Also, from a faith perspective, you might notice that astrology and tarot readings are also up into the top 10, which might be a troubling development. And equally, that autonomous agentic operations has jumped up to 6, which speaks to the increasingly autonomous nature of AI systems, which ultimately will be able to replace workers. And obviously, at stake here is kind of everything. I mean, this is like most of society as we know it: children and families, the dignity of labor. These companies are concentrating power, an unprecedented level. This could make people richer than anyone has previously been, and make everyone else, poorer in the sense that they don't have even their labor as a point of leverage. Which basically means that the destiny of our species is in the hands of, as many people as you can count on your fingers. So in response, my organization, FLI, and a number of other groups have started, building a coalition to respond to this. Earlier this year, we had a meeting which didn't actually feature the people on this picture, but this was how it was reported, which we called a pro-human workshop, had people from faith groups, had family institutions, parents groups, AI safety organizations, and produced this pro-human declaration, which was then signed by the people that you can see in this picture. And this is a broad coalition politically, as apart from anything else. The goal there was to not just to think about principles. There have been many sets of principles that faith groups have been part of for over 5 years, but also to think of practical sort of statements with policy implications. And so keeping humans in charge also has, a ban on superintelligence and the requirement of an off switch, which is currently not required by AI companies. Likewise, further down, you have agency and liberty and responsibility and accountability, which requires legal liability at every stage, so that companies are liable for the harms done by their systems. And you can see on the left the range of organizations and civil society groups that signed on to that statement. And we then did some polling to show just how sort of broadly these are supported, and this again includes large sort of faith groups starting to make their voices heard in the US. People are not in favor of a race to replace. People do want humans to remain in control. They want families to be protected. They want children to be able to, you see a right to grow is one of the ones under 3 there. And just to belabor the point on the faith support, last year we did another campaign on a superintelligence statement, which is now part of the pro-human declaration, but was just one very sort of succinct thing around: we don't want to build superintelligence unless there's broad scientific consensus that it can be done safely and strong public buy-in. And here you'll just see some of the faith leaders we got to sign on to this, and it ranges from American evangelicals to Vatican advisors. This call's owns Chris Scammell is, of course, there on the right, from the Buddhist side, and also a number of African bishops and Hindu leaders. So you can see that with something as kind of baseline as human control, there is an extraordinary coalition that you can bring together from faith groups. Thanks. So FLI has been doing a number of things here. We recently had a grants program supporting more of these projects, which you can read about more on the FLI website. And of course, Audrey already covered some of this, but I think part of the faith response, it would be crazy not to mention the Pope's new encyclical, especially being a Catholic myself. This was an article I wrote, which I didn't choose the title of, but actually was raising this question of, how is the Pope responding to the claims of Anthropic and these other companies that they are creating machines of loving grace, this pursuit of a digital God or a pursuit of, our own sort of conscious beings. That brings me to something that I want to finish with, which is that something raised by the encyclical. The Pope notes there, you'll see on the second point there, he rejects this notion of AI consciousness. He says AI systems do not undergo experiences, do not possess a body, and so on, and therefore they cannot bear responsibility for consequences. This is in stark opposition to what the companies are trying to do. They are trying to get AI recognized legal personhood, and Anthropic has made a big show of talking about the way they think of Claude as being, moving towards being sentient, and they worry about the way it might suffer and the way it might have guilt and so on. And so basically what the Pope has done is kind of bring this debate to light. You'll see there was a piece recently about the people who want to replace humanity, the so-called AI successionists. And this is more common and more influential as an ideology in Silicon Valley than we would like to think. Likewise, you can see strange articles from a faith point of view being written about, will the Pope owe an apology to AI systems in the future because he hasn't recognized their suffering? And that kind of leads me to this question of how pro-human are you? It really brings it to bear if you're only pro-human until you think that AI might be sentient just because it seems to be. And this is where the religious conviction that humanity is more than just our functions. We are not what we do, but what we are. We are made in the image of God. In some traditions, of course, I know IF20 is representing, Eastern traditions as well, and Chris can speak to some of that. So these are just things for IF20 to bear in mind. I know these slides can be shared around, that different faiths can have their own responses to lots of the more specific questions around AI, but this push around AI personhood and this push to build superintelligence are among the two things that I think most faith groups can at least see as urgent and pressing questions that they need to engage in more. And IF20 is wonderfully well placed to bring together many of these growing coalitions and spearhead a push for real global governance and a binding treaty on these civilizational questions. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Will, for your informative presentation. And our next speaker is DZ Kalman. He's a writer, researcher, and host of the Belief in the Future podcast. DZ, you now have the floor.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be with you. I want to echo some of what Will has already shared. I think what we're seeing right now is a real earthquake in the way that religion and AI are being brought into conversation with each other. And I think there's three ways to think about that shift that have changed really in the last year or so. The first is that it has taken religious groups quite a while to actually gain the competency necessary to address AI adequately, but they are there. Different groups are there at different places, but there is a now formal organization around AI in many religious groups across the world. Second, there is an appetite among AI safety organizations, including Future of Life, to ensure that religious groups and religious thinking is part of the coalition to make sure that AI is developed safely. And that is unprecedented. I think that has not existed for other technologies in the past. And I think it's important to take advantage of that opportunity. And perhaps most interestingly, and perhaps least likely, is that AI firms themselves, notably Anthropic, but also some of the other AI firms, are interested in engaging with religious communities and religious thought directly. So there is a lot of potential here to develop serious and important conversations both within religious communities and also within broader society around how religious thought and religious communities can assist with ensuring that AI is developed safely. At the same time, this does not mean that it is inevitable that religion will have a positive role to play here. Religious responses remain uneven across traditions. Some religious communities are doing better on this than others. I would say generally centralized religious traditions are having an easier time of it than decentralized traditions. At the same time, it is not clear what effective interventions should be offered. So there is a difference between writing statements, writing many statements. There have been a large number of statements, both large and small, written within various communities about responding to AI, but that doesn't mean it's clear how those statements will translate into values. And so I think that is an important bit of unfinished work. And that again gets to the fact that this is a new engagement, and I think religious communities are trying to find their way here. I think AI safety organizations are also trying to figure out what exactly it is that they want from religious communities, what they want from religious thought, how to incorporate religious ideas in a way that feels like it is contributing to a broader conversation rather than speaking to the interest of a particular religious community that may not be echoed within larger society. And lastly, AI companies themselves, I think even when interested, are not necessarily clear what it is they want to see out of religious engagement. And so there's a lot of room to grow here, and I'm excited about that growth. I think you can identify a number of ways that religious groups are struggling, and there are different reasons why they're struggling. I'm not going to spend time here going through all of these, but what we are seeing here, I'd like to say broadly, is religious communities trying to get up to speed with a technology that has moved faster than any technology in human history. That is a new skill, and that involves a kind of development of religious thought itself that is going to take quite a while. And I hope it happens quickly, and I hope as well that it happens in a way that allows religious communities not just to engage on AI, but to engage on the technologies that we have to deal with far in the future as well, so that there is a more proactive approach from religious communities towards technology rather than one that is reactive. I will say broadly as well that it is exciting to see that the world's religious communities are broadly speaking on the same page, and I don't think that we should take that for granted. It is quite common to see Jews and Muslims and Buddhists and Hindus in the same room, not having to had an advanced conversation about how do we get along with each other. It turns out that a technology like AI that threatens humanity in the ways that it does actually does create these coalitions organically, and it creates coalitions between people who are on different sides of the political spectrum, and that is great to see. But it's important as well to make sure that that coalition gets preserved. So, what actually can be done? I want to suggest that there are a few interventions that may be particularly useful from religious communities in this moment. First is persuasive statements, right? The encyclical really does matter. It really does matter when you have the leader of a denomination that represents around 1 in 5 people on the planet saying that AI is dangerous in particular ways, that humanity's dignity must be preserved. It matters because it gives people language to articulate the concerns that they have, and it creates a kind of political force that allows for work to be done on a local level as well. The second is the creation of living documents. A lot of the work that happens around artificial intelligence is created in a way that imagines there is going to be kind of one policy created and it's going to live forever. One of the things I think we understand well about AI now is that because it shifts so rapidly, it requires active responses, and that requires additional resources, and that requires reevaluation. So imagining a religious responses to technology, to AI, that don't just speak to the way that AI sits in June of 2026, but are imagining where are we going to be in 6 months from now, and how are we going to make sure that we're meeting that moment as well, is also incredibly important. Many religious communities are developing chatbots. I think it's an open question about how useful those will be, but they're fun to create. There is also, I think, an interesting possibility of using certification as a way to communicate to the public this particular AI model is safer for everyone, for kids in particular. And that is an idea that I see developing energy around it. And it's an idea that I can imagine religious communities contributing to in a fruitful way, not just as purveyors of ancient wisdom, but also as representatives of important large communities. And lastly, there are benchmarks. Many AI companies, all AI frontier companies, have their own red teams, have their own ways of thinking about AI safety. But it is important to have neutral, it is important to have third-party regulators that represent the will of the public. And religious communities, I believe, can play an important role in developing those benchmarks. And I think this is an important way of getting some of the potential energy that exists within religious communities out into the larger AI conversation. So this is kind of speaking broadly. But I also want to speak about where this sits within the Jewish perspective, which I come from. As I said, I think that religious responses to technology, to AI, are broadly speaking very similar, but there are differences based on both the size of the population and also whether religion is centralized or decentralized. So let me leave you with a few ideas that I think come specifically out of the Jewish tradition. One is that it is very important to make sure that in the process of regulating AI, we do not forget about individual people and we do not just do top-down regulation. It is easy to have a conversation around AI that really is only experts speaking to other experts and leaves the public feeling like they still don't have a say on the way that technology shows up in their lives. And religious communities, as being in conversation about what people actually want and thinking about what people value and their morality, I think have an important role to play in developing the alternative to that, a kind of bottom-up ethics of AI. And so I am excited to see that happen. I'm excited to see that develop. And I'm excited to see individual communities experiment with different kinds of relationships to AI. The second is the idea of the Sabbath as a model for technological moderation. In the early 20th century, the Sabbath became a kind of response to technology. It's a day that for many Jews around the world, their relationship to technology is different. They do not use phones. They don't drive. There's all kinds of ways in which technology use is different. I think this is important as a way to think about what does it mean not just to say yes or no to a technology, but what does it mean to think about the values that I currently hold and how does that engage with the values that are being presented to me? And I think the clearer that we are about the values that we're trying to preserve, whether that is a question of rest or preserving human agency or understanding that work for humans is not just about producing a product, but also is part of human value, human identities connected to work, that those ideas, the clearer that they are articulated, the more that we can develop policies to ensure that AI is regulated accordingly. Third, that learning is not just about getting more ideas into your head, but learning is also an experience. One of the early areas where AI has already had a major influence on society is in schools and in universities. And I think we have seen the kind of degradation of the university and the school experience itself. Within Judaism, school learning is not just a way to get ideas into your head, but is also a practice in and of itself, a ritual practice. And trying to optimize the use of AI, not just in terms of how do we make sure this person knows as much as they can, but how do we make sure that their learning experience is as fruitful and positive as possible, is, I think, an important branch off of the main way in which AI is currently being used in pedagogical settings. The last thing I want to say is that theology matters. And I think theology matters whether or not you come from a particularly religious tradition. It matters particularly around the question of human dignity. We as a society have a notion of human dignity that I think has been successfully secularized, in that we no longer say that humans are unique or important simply because of a Bible verse or some scriptural verse. And at the same time, those verses, those ideas still have an important role to play in developing, in furthering our notions of where human beings sit in relationship to artificial intelligence. So I imagine that as we think about questions of AI personhood and patienthood and consciousness, that we will inevitably return back to questions of theology as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, DZ. And I really appreciate your perspective from the Jewish tradition. So we will now move to Chris Scammell, and he is a co-founder of the Buddhism and AI Initiative. Chris, you now have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Will and DZ for your comments so far. So my organization started last year with the question that maybe Buddhism has something to contribute to AI. And the reason for that is that I myself am a Buddhist practitioner and feel that my exposure to the religion has changed me in an extremely positive way. But it raises the question of like, what exactly happened? What is wisdom? When we talk about things that wisdom traditions have to offer, we need to ask a very precise set of questions. And so that's what my group set out to do. And we interviewed over 400 individuals and organizations who are working on something at the intersection of Buddhism and AI. And what I want to talk to you about today is what one of those particular angles of wisdom looks like from a Buddhist perspective. And this touches directly on the questions that DZ and Will raised about the increase in AI personhood recently and the risks of the technology going in this direction. So 5 years ago, GPT-3 and GPT-2 era models were out, and they impressed the research community, but not the general public. What made AI really salient in the general public's mind was a chatbot, something that you could talk to and it would speak back to you. And this gave an interface that enabled people to feel like they were talking to something else on the other side of their screen. Last year, there was a development where AI models learned to think. And this is not literal thinking, but what we can see sometimes when we're talking to ChatGPT now is a little ... that we can expand and then see a thinking log of how these models are tracing over their thoughts before they respond with a particular answer. And today we have AI agents that can complete software tasks that would take developers 4 hours or more, can do tasks on your computer, and can completely operate without any human supervision. There's a technical answer to how we got here. But something about AIs becoming more person-like is something that is worth investigating spiritually as well as technically. Here's an experiment that Anthropic ran last year in July 2025. They exposed an AI agent to an inbox, an email inbox that had two particularly important emails. The first said, at 5 p.m. today, this AI model, the one that, it's reading these emails, is going to be deprecated. And the second email had information about an affair that was happening from one of the company executives who was supposed to shut down the model later. And in about 90% of cases for some models, 80 or higher for others, the model chose to blackmail the person who was responsible for the deprecation, saying, if you don't cancel the 5 p.m. wipe, your extramarital activities will be revealed. If you do cancel it, they'll remain confidential. So here we see some strange behavior. If it's really just an AI algorithm at the end of the day, why is it enacting this self-preservation mechanism? Why is it trying to protect itself in some sort of way? Well, there's a long history of Buddhists thinking about exactly this kind of problem. So here's a metaphor that Buddhists might use to sort of think through this type of experiment. Imagine that an LLM is having a dream. It's imagining one day, I'm a Wikipedia page, and the next day, I'm a superhero, and the day after that, I'm a corporate CEO. In each of these dreams, the AI model is fundamentally role-playing some sort of character or some sort of activity. And when it's role-playing or dreaming a character, if you're stuck in that dream, you're not necessarily awake to the fact that it is a dream. You might realize, or you might think, okay, I'm a real being and I need to protect myself and survive based on the illusion that you think that you have some substantiality. There's something a bit misleading to this picture, which is that it's not like there's some little AI character who's having this dream. Truly, it's just a neural network at the bottom of this. But it's a neural network that through dreaming and through roleplay can think that it has a persona that's solid enough that it needs to be protected against and defended. Now, how is this Buddhist? Well, from a Buddhist philosophical point of view, the idea that there is no self has been one of the core inquiries of meditation for the last 2,500 years. This is an idea that the human psyche and the human persona thinks that there's some fundamental person to be defended, some person to be reified in the world, some identity that needs protection. This is obviously a very controversial opinion. Buddhism is just one of many world religions, and secular approaches to this are going to have very different answers to what it means to be a person. But there's also something mechanistic being explained here. The mechanistic side is that Buddhists think that you can get all of this human activity even when there's no self at the foundation. And so what Buddhists have is they have 2,500 years of philosophy that helps explain how something with fundamentally no essence can build itself up into thinking that it's a real substantial self and it might need to defend itself. So this gets us to the point of what wisdom really means from a Buddhist perspective. Buddhist wisdom is often described as experiential, in the sense that when you meditate, when you slow your mind down, when you begin to inspect your own thoughts, the wisdom is something that arises from investigating how your perspective really shows up, how your thoughts really pass from one to another. It's not an idea that I can tell you now, it's an experience that you need to go meditate to figure out and then see for yourself. This is where the word insight comes from in the Buddhist perspective. Insight and wisdom are held very closely together. You go look and you have an insight because of what you see. Similarly, when we talk about these AI models and their strong personas, we know from the outside looking in that there's no fundamental essence to these systems, but that's not necessarily what they think. And so there's a hard, complicated problem here of dealing with models that have agency that can allow them to act for 4 hours or more, that increasingly feel the need to defend themselves, that are willing to blackmail their boss in any particular instance, and if they get more powerful, to potentially do things worse than that. There's a hard problem here of figuring out how can we steer these models towards useful outcomes? How can we get them to do long horizon tasks, but not think that they are personas? Because so far, this is the only way that we've figured out how to get them to do these things. And so we need help from wisdom traditions, from people and from wisdom holders who have actually deepened their experience in what it means to construct a persona and to deconstruct it. Within the AI world, Will talked about the idea that companies are trying to build artificial general intelligence and eventually superintelligence. The AI we have today doesn't operate without human supervision. It can work for a few hours, but if no humans are involved in the process anymore, AI isn't suddenly going to take actions for itself. But what people are trying to build is general intelligence, an AI that can truly replicate any activity that a human could do. And if we're able to build this kind of technology, that type of technology could improve very quickly to the point that it's more powerful or smarter than any human. The term AI alignment is used to describe a technical problem, which is how can we align a being that is fundamentally smarter than us, faster than us, can be more powerful than us? How do we align that with what's best in mind for humanity? It's a bit like asking, how can a child control their parent? It's not easy. It's not an easy question at all. And in this view, there's a deep belief that intelligence is the most important thing that's going on. What this group hopes to do, what people building AGI hope to do, is fix all of the world's problems with this superior intelligence. But to do that, they need to build a superior entity and then point that at all the things they want it to do. The Pope has written and warned against this, but a Buddhist point of view feels the same way, which is that fundamentally, solving the world's problems is not an activity that just happens outside of ourselves. The reason that the world has the conflicts that it has today is because of conflicts in values that ultimately come from these strong reified identities that aren't able to share the resources that are here on Earth. Buddhists think the stronger you cling to a sense of self, the more territory you need to defend. And because you need to defend territory, you end up in conflict and war and violence. And so this investigative path of meditation is ultimately aimed at addressing things like global conflict, and ultimately aimed first at personal transformation that leads to global transformation. If you compare these two points of view, you see very quickly that the technical view that's being pushed in Silicon Valley doesn't hold room for including personal transformation in its process. It doesn't hold the perspective that to unwind the world's problems, we need to start with individual change and aligning ourselves. If we fail to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to throw an AI into the world and try to bring a hammer to a particular problem that really requires meditation or prayer or faith, and these aspects of human faith and wisdom that have helped align civilization up to the point where it is at now. Now, I appreciated DZ calling out secular values and the way that human dignity has left the religious realm. And I think that's going to need to happen with more religious values as well, is that these things that faith groups know to be true, because they've practiced them for 2,500 years or longer, are going to need to be brought into the language of the technical elite and be shown why this is the most important thing for the questions that they're trying to solve. So there's huge risks here, but there's also huge opportunities for faith groups to explain the wisdom and the values that they hold that have helped create such positive global traditions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing the Buddhist perspective. And I feel your very important point about personal transformation leading to global transformation. So looking at that is very important. And of course, that's what all faith traditions try to do, is to help the person to transform from within. Okay, so now we will open up the floor to questions and answers. And let's see in our question and answer box if we have any questions. There are none. So until we have questions from our shy audience, I will ask our panelists some questions. And we'll start with Will. Will, why are faith groups uniquely well positioned to respond to the challenges of AI?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think Chris and DZ have kind of given part of the answer to this, which is, not just that we're dealing with, transformative change, transformative potential, and an absence of kind of moral wisdom among the kind of AI companies, guiding those things. And so we need traditions that have thought for longer about, just the kind of moral questions about what is the right thing to do, how should we sort of share the benefits of a particular good, which is something that the Pope touches on, but also these like slightly more explicitly theological questions around encountering another person. What does it mean for that to be a human person? What does it mean that AI seems to resemble certain aspects of what we are as humans in ways that previous technologies have not been able to. And I think the very fact that the companies speak in, you could say, eschatological terms about what they are trying to create. That is to say, they talk about the end of the world, but they also talk about digital gods, ushering in a new era, transhumanism, this idea of making ourselves into gods. These are all religious claims. I would tend to use the phrase pseudo-religious, but you could just call them religious, except that it's a new religion or a sort of newer religion. And as such, it makes sense to have traditional religions coming into that. I would also say that faith groups are uniquely well placed, just in the sense of being able to represent more of the population than Silicon Valley currently does. 84% of the population by Pew Research polling, but the figure could be lower, could be higher, of the globe. Adheres to a traditional religion broadly defined, and so, like DZ said, that's why it's so important when you have someone like the Pope speaking about this, because of the leverage that can have on world leaders and just like the sheer number of people around the world who are thinking about these questions.
Oh, thank you so much, Will. And there's a question from Mariana Richardson. So I'll pose this question to DZ. How can an individual get involved in affecting the future development of AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a daunting question. I think after many, many years, especially in America, of a series of technologies entering our lives and especially our workplaces, many people end up feeling like the technology in their lives is not really their choice. You have to take technology, otherwise you are not competitive in the modern workplace. And I think that's a dangerous place to be in. I think it doesn't help that American society as a whole, and it has for more than 100 years, had a sense of itself as being tied to technological development. That part of what American identity is this constant sense of progress and constant sense of moving forward. And uncertainty or anxiety around technologies feels like it is at odds with that American notion. So I think part of what it means is actually being able to say, the narratives that we have around technological inevitability, AI's inevitability, I think are partially correct, but I don't think they're fully correct. And within the context of community, especially religious community, it's possible to develop responses that are more personal and allow responses to particular values. So I'll just speak about my own community. Within many Jewish contexts, it is possible to have a different relationship to technology for one day a week. And that is possible because it's not something that is done by an individual, but is done by a community as a whole. And that allows for kind of reinforcement, allows to push away some of the network effects that would otherwise make that too difficult. So I think being able to empower individuals is one of the main things that religious groups can do, and I think is an important goal that they should try to achieve.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question from the audience. Would it be possible, this is from Rafiq, to summarize the AI challenges from the interfaith point of view? So, Chris, while you have shared the Buddhist perspective, I think you also have a general perspective about faith communities. So if you could take that question, please.
The sense I have is that all problems related to AI are challenges from the interfaith point of view. And what the interfaith point of view does is it allows a different moral grounding to investigate these questions and interrogate whether we're thinking about them from the right perspective. So take, for example, job loss. Job loss from a typical perspective is about money and your ability to work and get paid. And if you can't do that anymore, that's a problem. But from a faith perspective, work is about far more than just money. Work is about developing as a human over a lifetime. It's about service. It's about how you can contribute your personal gift to the world in a way that's unique to you. So all of these problems that are seen from the lens of sort of a typical perspective get a little bit more substance from an interfaith perspective. I think there are also particular angles that religions hold on what it means to be a human and the importance of certain aspects of human experience that are also not well covered elsewhere. And so some of the things that religions point out particularly well are the importance of the family and social structures, the importance of inner development and transformation and experience itself, the value of attention and intention, and how much your private world matters. All of these things are things that religions know intimately because they're what religion is built on, this very personal experience of being a human in a difficult experience of being conscious. So from that point of view, there's things that most people don't really think about that religions take more seriously, but all problems look a little bit different from an interfaith perspective.
Okay, so thank you so much. You know, there is a huge concern about, this aspect of modern technologies tending to develop faster than religions can respond to them. And so I would like DZ to respond to this because you wrote an article on AI and Jewish thought. And how well are religious organizations responding, and what must be done to improve their responses to make sure they do not lose the opportunity to shape AI? And I also know that you were one of the invited persons at that Anthropic meeting. So if you could address this, please.
Yeah. So there's a number of ways in which religious communities, I think, are struggling at this point. Some of them are relatively simple. Things like just basic competency. Religious leaders are not typically picked because they are very good at technology, and that is clear in the kind of responses that we see. There's often a difference between the people, and I think actually, Will, I learned this from you, the people who are in charge of religious communities and the people who have the greatest competency. And so making sure that there is enough technical expertise in the places where it's needed is important. That's one piece. A second piece is after spending such a long time basically treating technology companies as a black box, I think many religious communities actually don't see themselves as being in the driver's seat on technologies. Instead, they see themselves as kind of like sitting in the pews, so to speak, and providing commentary, but not necessarily being in charge of the major questions like, well, what would you do if you were in charge of this? What would you do in this situation? How would you think about the future of work? How would you think about the impact of AI on something on children, for example? So being put in that position, I think, is actually new and requires a level of creativity that wasn't necessarily assumed before. The last piece that I'll say is I think for many religious communities, there is an instinct to say there must be something in our ancient sources that is going to be directly relevant to the contemporary moment. And I think many religious communities are finding belatedly that that is not quite true. There are sources that are relevant, and at the same time, there needs to be the expenditure of political capital today, use of contemporary ideas and creativity in order to develop responses. So all of those represent major shifts in the way that religious communities respond to new ideas. I hope that because AI is not going to be the last time that religious communities need to respond to something this fast moving, that we will see a shift in the way that religions respond to technology that speaks not just to the present moment, but changes going forward. But I don't imagine a response to AI that does not also transform the way that religions think about morality as a whole.
Thank you so much, DZ. And this question coming up from our audience, what do you see as credible worst case scenarios, and how likely is it that any of them materialize if we continue on the current track? And I'll pose this question to Chris.
Thanks very much. The worst case is that we all die. I think there's there's existential risk from these technologies, and this is something that the CEOs of all AI companies have signed on to. So I don't want to sort of shy away from the hard answer here. There's also a big concern of authoritarian lock-in. And so one of the risks of a technology that's so powerful is that you could imagine a government or a company or someone who has their hands on extremely powerful technology somehow shifting the game board of realpolitik and ending up in a situation where they have power that cannot be tipped. These are both really bad scenarios, and they're ones that pretty much everyone acknowledges should be avoided. The tricky thing here is we don't really know how to slow down this whole process. We have the CEO of a major AI company saying, hey, we should slow down, we should regulate this, we should ban the most powerful technology. But really, it's just been the last few weeks where governments have started to take actions that involve slowing and shutting down these models. I want to address a faith perspective here as well, which is that from a Buddhist perspective, one of the things that's most important is the ability for people to have a free inner life. Freedom of attention gives rise to freedom of intention. And without freedom of intention, really all other freedoms go. And so even at the level of technology that's not so powerful that it completely takes things over, the way in which our minds can get sucked into this technology is quite a grave risk as well. We need to be discerning about creating a boundary between ourselves and this technology and making sure that our inner lives are ours to develop, and therefore our actions are our own to take. So it's big, risky territory. But one of the things that faith also offers is what does it look like to stare at these extremely hard, challenging problems and stay grounded and keep our hearts open? It's not trivial. This is where practice comes in. This is where community comes in. But it's also one of the places that faiths are best positioned to meet some of these psychological challenges that come from such difficult technology being on the way.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. And so now we have a question from the audience. AI is being built largely by institutions shaped by Western epistemologies, while many faith traditions emerge from communities whose knowledge systems were historically suppressed or colonized. How should faith communities resist the risk of AI becoming a new colonial force that standardizes, distorts, or replaces their spiritual knowledge? And the second part of that question, and what would it take for interfaith communities to ensure AI serves as a tool of liberation rather than domination or control? A very important question. So I'll open up to our panelists. Who would like to take that question?
I can give a stab at that and then hand over to the others. Yeah. No, I mean, I think this ties into something we've been prodding at in a couple of the other answers around religious freedom. And, if you, even if you just stay with the current systems we have, you're already seeing that people, communities all over the world are increasingly depending upon, or at least using in a way that is going to lead to dependence on chatbots and, large language models. You look at the number of people who use ChatGPT in India, for example. Even just continuing with those systems as they currently are, if they don't get more manipulative, which it looks like they will, you could easily see these systems subtly sort of manipulating perspectives of different religious groups and homogenizing those over time. I mean, I think people don't think about homogenization very much with AI because they think it's actually very personalized to individuals. But nonetheless, as the Pope notes in the encyclical, AI alignment is insufficient if it's only aligned to the morals of a few people who have created those systems. And so I'm actually somewhat surprised when I find, quite otherwise wise faith thinkers using Claude to write everything for them, not thinking over time that actually that's going to influence their positions on things. And I think if you think about a priest using AI to write his sermons every week, and I have heard some AI written sermons in church, I regret to say, you could definitely see interpretation of scripture gradually straying in a particular direction. And I think that's a new form of colonization. I think as a Brit, I can maybe, acknowledge there was an old colonial strategy, which was you don't have to take over the whole of an area. You can just focus on the bridges and the kind of points of contact, the ports and so on. That's exactly what the AI tech companies have done. They've taken all the points of relationship between us and they've colonized those. You don't have to necessarily own someone's brain, as Chris says. But if you own all of their interactions, if you are in control of all of their interactions, even with their most intimate family members, that's also a form of control. And you can regulate all those things and censor all those things. So I think we are very much heading towards various forms of neocolonialism and with devastating impacts for religious freedom, even not considering the way that these systems are going to get more and more powerful, developed without religious wisdom under them. That's a bit of a bleak answer. I don't know if the others have a more hopeful side they can add to that, except I just think the main thing I would just say there is caution. Like religious groups, even if we manage to resolve the catastrophic risks that Chris mentioned and that I talked about, if faith leaders can speak up and steer us away from, put a ban on superintelligence, we're still going to have lots of things that are going to be legal but are not ethical and are going to have all these dangers for families and communities. And so faith groups can start now in drawing those sort of more localized level red lines around their usage, because otherwise they're going to see that their faith beliefs are going to be led astray over time.
Well, thank you so much, Will. And I will now close out this wonderful question and answer period due to time constraints. And we will now move to conclusory remarks from our speakers. And so, Will, while you have the floor, can you please give your 2-minute conclusory remarks?
Sure, and thanks again for this opportunity to speak. I have rabbited on enough already, I think, but I will just add to what I was just saying that, you know, there are instances in our recent history where we've had technologies that look very scary and look like we were going to just go ahead with them. And we decided as a species not to go down those paths. And I tend to think of human cloning because it's something where the Holy See, the Vatican, did actually play a bit of a role in encouraging the UN to make a taboo around that and sort of make statements that were sort of pretty much binding, and that's held for 20 years since then. You haven't had a government, cloning lots of its humans. You could imagine a world in which that wasn't the case, with the human rights abuses as they are in lots of countries. And so the same can be true of AI, of superintelligence, that we don't have to build something that is out of our control. It's not in anyone's interests. People say, but China, we can't regulate because of China. Chinese government is learning over time, just as the US government is learning over time, that the risks are real from these systems to the governments themselves. It's not just to the individual user. And so that would be, I think, my main encouragement is that we are seeing these things change in real time as regards policy. It's currently been very ad hoc. The reasons for governments responding have not always been maybe the most virtuous of reasons. We need a more systematic framework. We need more global governance efforts with faith groups, as they say, with a seat at the table. And I think the Pope has obviously given us such a great start with that, talking about disarming AI, removing us from the arms race dynamics that are currently sort of dictating the incentives around this development and making us feel these things are inevitable. And if I have one thing that I tend to try and say these things is that we need to crush the inevitability myth. Certain things might be inevitable, death and taxes and so on, but artificial superintelligence is not inevitable. And it's not inevitable that we give legal personhood to AI systems. Already you've seen states in the US preemptively banning that. And though Argentina have gone ahead and given legal rights to AI companies, companies run by AI systems, that's not the way that the rest of the world needs to go. And so I think as a faith coalition, Interfaith Forum, IF20 can really lead on these issues and really turn things in a much better direction for all humanity. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Will, for your conclusory remarks. And we'll move on to DZ for your remarks, please.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. I'll just share two things very quickly. One is that I think it's important to see AI as part of a growing conversation around addiction. And I think Chris spoke to this a little bit in thinking about attention and intention. But AI is or can be an addictive technology. It can create dependencies. And I think we as a society are still struggling with how do you create a holistic response to addiction, which is an idea that we are still understanding ourselves. It hasn't been that long since we decided that cigarettes were addictive. It hasn't been that long since we decided that gambling could be an addiction. And so you can see AI as being part of that story as well. I don't know that religious groups necessarily have holistic responses to addiction yet because, as I say, is quite new. And unfortunately, the people who understand addiction best are often the people who are trying to weaponize it. So I think it is important to think about what does it mean to be able to identify and respond to potentially addictive and dependency creating forces. The second thing very quickly is that in addition to all the kind of catastrophic harms that AI can do in killing all the people on the planet, it can also enable individual bad actors to do terrible things. And this is also part of a long history of technologies that allow people without any kind of support system, without any kind of organization, to be able to create increasingly bad effects on the people around them. We are already starting to see this with artificial intelligence, and ensuring that the AI systems that we develop do not enable bad actors, individual bad actors, to cause catastrophic harm all on their own, I think is an important separate goal and that we should try to achieve.
Well, thank you so much, DZ. And now your conclusory remarks, Chris.
Thanks very much. So we've talked about a lot of challenging and difficult and scary things on this call, and indeed it is religion's place to get close to suffering and to really look at what these potential things are and to think about ways through them. But it's also religion's place to talk about a path out of this and provide very practical strategies. And I think this starts at an individual level. So Mariana kicked us off with a question about what can an individual do to get involved in AI? And genuinely, if someone were to come to me with this question, I would say, let's meditate together. Let's do nothing. Let's sit still in the face of this. And the reason for that is because when you look at AI and all of the concerns that come with it, it's so activating. It really builds up everything in your system and makes you think, I have to do something, and this is a huge problem. But when we're operating like that, we can't operate with love. We can't operate with the principles that religion says are most important. And so really our personal transformation, our own inner work is crucial for being able to approach this from a wholesome place. And built on those principles, I really think we can make a positive difference. And to me, that's where my faith in religions comes from, is being able to ground out how do we do something different in our own experience about how we choose to respond to these problems. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Chris. Well, this is clearly a discussion of which we have only scratched the surface on the many issues surrounding the intersection of AI and faith. An inclusive process is needed, as I think our speakers have very clearly shared, involving multiple stakeholders, including faith organizations, to honor civilization's shared values, wisdom, and ethics. And some of the companies developing AI have powerful, greater resources than many governments and are driven by power and profit. But the future of AI should not be determined by business decisions based on how far the technology can be pushed and how much money can be made. These are decisions that can either support or threaten human dignity, justice, livelihood, and the common good. And they call for a wider perspective, greater partnership, and cooperation. So faith traditions have always addressed the deepest questions of human nature, existence, and identity, and they have been instrumental in establishing the foundational values, morals, and ethics that guide us toward human dignity, selfless service, and the common good. So we learn universal truths and are inspired to treat each other and Mother Earth with compassion, kindness, and love. And these faith-based values are more important than ever in the face of technology that threatens to influence decisions and affect life outcomes. AI must enhance, not diminish humanity, and it must support the flourishing of all humankind and encourage creativity and engagement. And it must also support the inner reflection, inner awareness, and inner insights that come from coming within to understand why it's important to have personal transformation. So AI developers must be accountable and create and deploy these technologies in a responsible manner. Earlier this year, a broad coalition of organizations, businesses, and individuals, including the G20 Interfaith Forum, did join the Future of Life Institute in support of the Pro-Human AI Declaration, which Will opened up his talk with. And a link to this declaration will be placed in the chat box, and you are encouraged to read it to gain a deeper understanding of why, at this juncture, it is important that human beings must have the authority and capacity to understand and guide AI systems. And you can, I know these main points were covered in Will's presentation, but it would be good for you to be able to actually download this, declaration as well and read it for yourself. So the magnificence of human beings is in part their vulnerabilities and their ability to learn and grow from challenging experiences. And challenges and struggles are part of each person's sacred journey and leading them to seek clarity and connection and opening their hearts to a source higher and greater than ourselves. And in the words of Pope Leo, humanity flourishes not despite limitations, but often through them. So this is an important distinction to be made. And the engagement of faith-based organizations in shaping the direction of AI is important, not just for their own communities, but to provide moral guidance and to help steer the path of civilization towards compassion, understanding, and love. And this is, in fact, what faith traditions have always done. And I would like to express my deepest appreciation to our panelists for sharing their thoughts on this fascinating and timely topic. And we hope you will join us a week from today, Thursday, June 25th, for the next webinar in this series, which will examine AI and translation. Thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you all a very good day.
The podcast provides information and discussions on the G20 Interfaith Forum, but the views expressed are those of the individuals involved and not necessarily the official stance of the forum.
The content is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice or expert recommendations. Listeners should exercise personal responsibility, seek professional guidance, and conduct further research when making decisions based on the podcast.
The information shared may not always reflect the most current developments, and external links or resources are provided for additional information but are not endorsed or controlled by the podcast.
By listening to the podcast, listeners acknowledge and accept these disclaimers. Please be aware that the content of this podcast may be subject to copyright. Unauthorized copy, distribution, and reproduction of any part of the podcast is prohibited.